Attention, all Epic gamers, it is time to set up that dedicated Palworld server for the girls or that Counter-Strike 2 server for the boys. It is so much easier than you think to set up a community server for these games. Valve makes it super easy with SteamCMD, we're going to get into it. Last night, I was playing 5 versus 5 competitive, I got all the homies around, and we played competitive bomb defusal Counter-Strike Minecraft. It was insane. So much fun, so worth it, we're going to get into it. Like, just look at this side. Who would not want to play this map? It's so good. Step 1, of course, is to actually get a Linux box. Now, a couple of ways you could do that. You could just host it on a local machine on your network. If you've already got a home server, great, you could just use that. If you're interested in setting up a home server, I actually have a complete start-to-finish guide on setting up a Debian Linux home server. You could also pay some dude in the cloud $5 a month to hire out a VPS. Great internet connection. If it gets compromised, who cares? You could host it on AWS, I don't know, fill it out. There's plenty of ways to get a Linux box. If you're running it on the Linux desktop, like if you're just running that as your OS, you could just use that. There's plenty of ways. Go ahead and log onto your Linux box. I'm going to be using this one right here. This is just running on my local network. It's actually a virtual machine on my server because the next part we're going to talk about is architecture. So before we actually go ahead and install this, you're going to want to choose how you want to set it all up. There are 3 major ways that I kind of think about it when I'm looking at doing this stuff. And what you'd prefer kind of depends on you. So the first way is to run it all bare metal locally. So you would just install SteamCMD onto your local host like this and just download all of the games and just run them like normal. Now, the thing is, that's very easy to do and it makes it all like super simple. But if one of them gets compromised, the entire machine gets compromised, basically. And that's not necessarily a problem if you are just renting out a VPS, like who cares? Or if you've got a dedicated machine for this stuff, like who really cares, you know? But if your server is going to be running other stuff as well, you might want to consider the second option, which is running this through Docker. Now, SteamCMD does come with an official Docker image that you can grab. When you're doing this with Docker, there's like one more architectural decision you're going to have to make, and that's how you containerize your servers. So essentially, the 2 main ways I can think of off the top of my head is you would have a Docker container in the first instance for every individual game server. So in that case, you would grab SteamCMD, the Docker image, and download that for as many game servers as you need. And then inside that Docker container, you log on to each individual SteamCMD instance and you download the game servers. Now, that is probably the best for security because if one of the servers gets compromised, only that Docker container is compromised. However, it does make it super annoying to manage all of your files because you've got different SteamCMD instances managing all of your game files. And you've got different Docker containers where all of those files are located. You could kind of remedy this by having like a common downloads folder that you pass into the Docker container. But again, it kind of does make it a bit annoying. And the second way that you could do this with Docker is if you have one single Docker container that runs all of your game servers on it. Now, in this scenario, it's more secure than the bare metal approach where you just run it, you know, through apt or your package manager on whatever Linux distro you're getting. Because in the event that one of the game servers gets compromised, sure, all of your game servers are compromised, like they've got access to that Docker container, but nothing else on the machine is compromised. So you might want to consider that approach because it makes one SteamCMD instance to manage all of your game servers. All of your game files are located in the same Docker container, and it does make it a bit easier to manage all of that. Now, the third option, and this is the one that I'm actually going to be going for, I'm going to use a virtual machine. Now, the reason for that, the first reason for that is because my home server actually runs FreeBSD, so you know SteamCMD doesn't have that. So what I'm going to do is just spin up a Linux VM and have it run that. But another reason I'm doing this instead of Docker is because when you're port forwarding like Docker ports essentially, so when you're running your server inside the Docker container, you can pass ports through it. So they would act as if when you connect to the host of the Docker machine, on a particular port, that goes to the Docker container running your server instead, which is what you want when you're running a game server. Now, the problem with that is that you have to decide that when you create the container for the first time, and to my knowledge, it is not easy to change. So in the situation like that, where I'm going to be running this essentially all I'm going to go for the one SteamCMD instance approach, where I just run all of the game servers off of one SteamCMD instance. Running it in a virtual machine like this means that I don't have to worry about any of the Docker port forwarding shenanigans. I can literally just configure this VM, and if it gets compromised, who cares? It's a virtual machine. That's what I'm going to be going for. So grab up a root shell on your Linux box, whether it's the bare metal host, the VM, or the Docker container you're going to be installing SteamCMD into. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at this documentation. Now, if you're running the Docker image, you probably won't have to install all this. It'll probably be set up for you. But if you're doing this on bare metal or a VM like me, I'm going to walk through it anyway. So here on the SteamCMD page, and of course I'll link this in the description, it shows you a couple of very common Linux distributions, package repositories basically. So essentially, you know, on Ubuntu, this is what you'd run if you're running Ubuntu server. On Debian, I'm going to be installing this on Debian, so this is what I'm going to be following. But after you do this, all of them should essentially be the same. So I'm going to grab the stuff for Debian. Now, copying and pasting commands from the internet is a bit sketch. So just walk through all of them and make sure you understand what they're doing. So sudo apt update just updates our package list. That's fine. Sudo apt install software properties common just installs a package from the official repositories. That's also fine. Apt add repository non-free. Of course, Steam has non-free components, and the non-free repo is an official Debian one, so that's fine. Add architecture i386, like add support for 32-bit software packages. That's again fine. And then update our package repositories again. So this command is totally chill to just go ahead and copy paste. So go ahead and do that. I've already gone ahead and done this, so it's not going to prompt me for anything. But for you, you might have to say yes to a couple commands, you know. But essentially, after that's done, it's literally just apt install SteamCMD. And again, I've already done it, but it'll prompt you to install it if you haven't already. Now, the next thing they suggest is to create a user to run SteamCMD as. So again, it's a security thing. If that gets compromised, you're not running the game server as root, you're running it as a separate user. So hopefully only that user's access is compromised. So to do that, you can just go ahead and do user add -m and then the name of the user. I already have made a Steam user, so I'm not going to go ahead and do this, but it's literally, you hit enter, it'll make the user, it's as simple as that. And then after you've done that, you can set a password for the user with this command. I'll just set a password, password 1. How secure is that? So essentially what you've done is you've added the repositories that SteamCMD is in, you've installed SteamCMD, and you've created a user for it to run as. We're absolutely bing chilling, guys. Now all we have to do is go su steam. That will change our user to the Steam user. We can cd to our home directory right here, and you see that's home Steam. So now we are ready to download our games, basically. So to do that, all you want to be doing is launch the SteamCMD command, and it'll start up, download the Steam client libraries and everything like that. And then once that's done, it'll give you a shell prompt, essentially, that you can go ahead and access Steam APIs and things from, which is what we're going to be doing to download our games. Now, there's a couple of different ways that we can go ahead and access the Steam APIs. Number one is you can log in with a Steam account. Now, they do actually recommend, so I'll pull the documentation back up. As you can see, they recommend that you create a new Steam account for dedicated servers. So I'll just make this a bit bigger so you can see. Create a new Steam account for the dedicated server. So don't use the one with your like thousands of dollars in Counter-Strike skins, all right? It's not a great idea. But alternatively, you can also log in as anonymous. So you don't even have to use an account for a lot of game servers. If you've got a particular game that you might have paid for that requires you to log in to an account that's purchased that game, you might need to do that. I personally haven't come across any. Palworld and Counter-Strike don't require you to do that, and those are the only ones I've set up so far. So I've only ever had to log in as anonymous here. But essentially, now that this is done, we're at the SteamCMD password prompt. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is log in as anonymous, and it'll connect us up. And yeah, we're basically done. So a couple of options here. The next step on the SteamCMD wiki is downloading an app. So what you can do here is to this option right here, right? Force install directory. we're all probably familiar with Steam apps, common, and then the game files, right? If you don't set this force install dir, it'll do exactly that. So it'll create a folder in your home directory called .steam. It'll make Steam apps, it'll make common, and that's where your game servers and files are going to be located. If you want to change that, you can set force install directory to a certain path before you download the game. So if you wanted to change, they've got a Counter-Strike Global Offensive one here, rip CSGO, I miss ya, but you can set that right here, and then when you do this next section down here, where you actually download the game, it'll download to that. Personally, I don't really care for this. Having them all in Steam Apps Common is fine. It works great with my muscle memory, so I don't care. I just thought I would say that if, you know, you are someone who wants to do that. So the next thing we want to go ahead and do is this app update command is what we're actually going to use to download our game servers. Now, you are going to need to get the app ID of the game servers that you want to run. Popular games, you can kind of just Google it and get the answer. So this is the one for Palworld. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy that because I haven't got it memorized. So here we can do app update. And this is where we're actually going to download our apps. So I'll start with Counter-Strike 2. So Counter-Strike 2 is the one I have memorized. It's just 730, pretty easy. To run a CS2 dedicated server, you need to download the entirety of CS2. So if you just go app update 730, it will go ahead and download the entirety of CS2. And then from there, you can configure it to be a dedicated server, which we'll get to in just a minute. The same process it's identical for Palworld, right? So what I'm going to do is just cancel that real quick. We'll go through it again just for Palworld from start to finish. So grab SteamCMD, log in anonymous, wait for us to connect, and then app update, and then Palworld's ID is this. So it'll go ahead and start downloading Palworld. Now I'll let these download and come back to you real quick. So they're both done downloading. I also downloaded the Counter-Strike Source dedicated server because if you didn't notice in one of my previous videos, I was actually surfing on my own dedicated CS Source Surf server. So I already had that one sort of in the background, but as you can see right here, it's created a .steam directory. So we can go ahead and have a look at that .steam directory. And you'll notice that this is like identical to what the regular Steam client sort of produces. So we can go Steam Apps, Common, and you'll see your dedicated service that you've downloaded. Now, CS2 is still called Counter-Strike Global Offensive, even though it is CS2. It's kind of funny how that works, but essentially, yeah. So you can go ahead into the Common directory and just list out all your servers. So we will start with the CS2 dedicated server because that one is pretty simple, pretty easy to get off the ground. So if you go to the directory for it, and type ls, there's a game folder, and inside the game folder there's a bin folder, and inside the bin folder there's a Linux Steam RT64 folder, and inside this folder, if you cd to it and do an ls, there's all these files here. This is the file we're interested in. It's CS2. That's the executable for CS2. Now, what I would recommend you do is create a startup script. So I've already got one here from when I pre-configured this, so I'll go ahead and open that up for you. If you just create a start.sh, you can start it off with a shebang at the top, check what your shell interpreter is. On Debian, it's user bin bash, and then from there you can say CS2 and then pass it some options. So the only options that I found relevant for me, there's a bunch more. There's actually another dedicated server for CS2 page on the Valve Developer Wiki. I will just bring that up real quick. So it's this one right here, and it should have command line parameters, so you can set all of these different ones if you so desire. These are the only ones that were really relevant for me and my purposes. So you give it the dedicated option, of course, you're going to need that. The port that you want to run it on. So one thing to note is that when you're running these game servers, they all need different ports, because when you port forward this in your router for your friends to come and join, you can't all be running them on the same port. So it's good to just dedicate a port. I think the default one is 27015 for a lot of Steam games. So just make sure you set it explicitly to something different. And then I've just said the starting map is going to be Dust 2. Classic. If Cobblestone was still in the game, that would be my starting map, but it's Dust 2 for now. So once you've made that startup script, you can go ahead and start it. So we'll run with start, although you'll have to, if you've just made it, you'll have to chmod mark as executable. So if we go ahead and start.sh, you'll notice a couple of things. It's going to complain. And the reason it's going to complain is because it can't find this module here, Steam SDK64 steamclient.so. And the reason it can't find that is because if you have a look at our Steam directory, now this happened to me on Debian, it may not happen to you, but if you get this same problem, I'll show you how to fix it real quick. So if you actually go ahead and do a listing of, and it's actually bugged out my terminal. Okay, so after having that bug out my terminal, I just relogged in and we're back at the home directory. Now, the file that it was complaining about not finding, if you remember, was steamclient.so. So if we want to go ahead and find that, let's try and find that. So if we go to .steam and we have a look at Steam and we have a look at SteamCMD, if I can type that correctly, you'll notice we've got two folders here. One is called Linux 64, the other is Linux 32. Now, if we go to Linux 64, we actually have steamclient.so here in Linux 64. So what we have to go ahead and do is create a symlink to this folder to the one that it was looking for. So to do that, you can type ln-s for a symlink. And the way that I remember the arguments is that the S stands for source. It doesn't actually stand for source, but you put the source first. So home/steam.steam, and then we're looking for SteamCMD /Linux. Oops, I forgot another Steam in here. SteamCMD Linux 64. And now we are going to symlink that. And take note, when you specify the source, it has to be the entire path. You can't use relative path or it'll bug out. So you can then go ahead and set that to home steam.steam, and then it should be SDK64 in this folder. So let's go ahead and look at our .steam folder, and you can see we've got another symlink here to SDK64. Now, if you're setting up a Counter-Strike source server as well, you'll need to do the exact same thing, but for SDK32, like that. So now if I look at my folder again, you can see I've got these two symlinks here. Now, if I go back to my Counter-Strike server real quick, if I can find my way back, I always forget how to navigate back. Global Offensive game, bin, Linux. Now, if we go ahead and start this up again, you should notice that it's actually going to start up correctly this time. And you can see that it's loading in all of our stuff, and it should start dust2. Yeah, here we go. Loading dust2, basically. Now, one little tip that I've got for you here is about a Linux utility called Screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and log in to that again on something I've got a root shell on. So if I go back to this and I elevate, you can apt install a program called Screen. Now, Screen is super useful, and I'll show you why. If you just grab Screen, I've already got it, of course, but kill your server real quick. And now, what you've noticed is that while you're running your server, this terminal window has to be open or the process will kill itself. What you can do is run Screen. So if you do screen./start.sh, it'll open it up. And if you hit Control, if you hold down Control, press A, release A, and then press D, and then release D, what it'll actually do is detach. So what I've just done is detach from the running process and come back to this shell. And what I can do is at any time, I can resume that with screen-R. So what I can do is completely exit this shell entirely. Like I can just type exit, 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 close the connection, but my server is still running. And I can come back to that. I just sue back to this one with the super secure password that I created that I actually can't even type for some reason. And I can just do screen-R and it'll bring me back to my game server, which is really handy. So yeah, go ahead and do that. Now I will show you loading into the server to show that it's all good. One thing that you might have to consider before you do that though is your firewall. So Counter-Strike servers, if you're on Debian, so if you don't have a firewall on this machine at all, you don't have to, you can skip this section, but I'll show you my firewall setup. So whatever you pick for Counter-Strike, you have to forward both the TCP and the UDP port for that. So here I've got 27017 forwarded, and if you're using UFW, it's literally UFW allow 27017, and you can hit enter and it'll do it for TCP. And if you add /UDP to the end, it'll forward it for UDP. So you want to do both of those. But once you've allowed it on your firewall, you should be good to go. So we'll load into Counter-Strike and try and connect to the server. So we're here in Counter-Strike 2. If you open up the console, if you don't have the developer console enabled, by the way, it is under games. So you can go to developer console and you want to enable the developer console right here. So basically once you've done that, open up the developer console and you can type connect and then the IP address of your server. So in my case, it is 192.168.1.29 and then a colon. Apologies if you can't really see the text. I can't make it bigger because it's the Steam console, but 27017 is my port. So I can just go ahead and hit connect and it'll load me into the server. So if you want to play funny workshop maps like this Minecraft one right here, just go to the workshop page in your web browser and up here in the SteamCMD URL where it says ID equals, just go ahead and copy the number. So you go ahead and do that. And back in your server console real quick, you can type down the bottom, host_workshop_map, and then paste in the ID of the workshop map. And for me, it'll instantly swap over because I already have the map downloaded. But for you, it'll download the map in the background and then swap over to it as soon as the download is complete. You can also download maps from SteamCMD itself. So if you go into SteamCMD, I might have to log back in real quick. You can download them from here as well. So it's workshop_download_item, the app ID of the game, so 730, and then the thingo, the ID of the thing. So as you can see, it's downloaded the map to our, CS2 directory. So you can go ahead and exit out of that. And I'll boot up Counter-Strike again. Do that right now because I've got it in this window. So if we go to Counter-Strike and we go ahead and connect back to our server, you can see now we're loading into aim_Minecraft_village. And here we are in our beautiful Minecraft day. Palworld is even easier to get set up than Counter-Strike 2. So on our home directory here, we can just go ahead and go back to our Steam directory. Steam apps, common, Pal server. And if you look at this directory right here, there's a file called palserver.sh. Now I have gone ahead and made a start script for this. Start.sh, /. And essentially what this does is infinitely loop the Pal server because I had an instance where my 24/7 Palworld server went down because the connection dropped to Steam in the middle of the night and that just crashed the game for some reason. So I've just got this cheeky little while true loop that'll just continuously restart the Palworld server if it's going bad. But for Palworld, in your firewall, and I'll go back to my user that has sudo access, the Palworld port is 8211. So you want to forward 8211. And I think that should be it. But then again, I have all of these other ports forwarded. Honestly, I'll just say this right now. There is so little documentation on what ports you actually need to forward in order to get this stuff to work. So it's kind of just a shot in the dark. The ones that I have forwarded for Palworld are 8211. That seems to be the client port that you connect to on TCP at least. And then in my router, I'll actually put a screenshot on screen of the ones I have port forwarded to this server so you can see which ones I actually needed to port forward for Palworld, Counter-Strike, all of that stuff. Because the documentation for this stuff is actually kind of poor. Screen./start.sh, or if you don't want to do the infinite loop, you could just do palserver.sh. Of course, if you make one of these, remember to chmod it as executable, and it'll just start up. And so Palworld should be started up, and I will join you in the Palworld server. So we're over here in Palworld, just go ahead and hit join multiplayer game. And down the bottom here, in this like custom connect bar is where you put in the IP address of your server. So I'm going to say 192.168.1.29 and the port 8211. Again, that's the default Palworld port. If you've changed it, then go ahead and put in the custom one. I entered a password, so You can set that up in the Palworld settings. I'm not going to dive into the Palworld settings because there's documentation available for it. I might make a follow-up video if you're interested, or like a short or something. But essentially, the password that I've just set for this server is Minecraft Toot, because I'm doing a Minecraft tutorial. So if you go ahead and hit OK, what you'll notice is that we are suddenly loading into Palworld, which is fantastic. Now, I already have a save game on this, so it's not going to bring me to the selection screen, but I just want to show you that we're loading into the game server all fine. Just give it a moment. I mean, I'm going to keep this going in live time with no cuts so you can see that it's actually loading in and there's no smoke and mirrors. But I currently have Palworld on my hard drive, and so loading in obviously takes a little while. So here we are, we're in Palworld on our custom dedicated server. Pretty cool. If you don't port forward your servers, none of your friends are going to be able to join them. Now, unfortunately, I can't actually show you how to port forward because every router is different. That's the really unfortunate nature of port forwarding. You'll want to be looking in your router for something titled either port forwarding gives the game away, or virtual servers or something like that, or address forwarding. It'll be something like that, and I'll show a screenshot of what it is for me, but you could look at your router's model number and then port forwarding and search that on Google, and hopefully someone out there will have done a tutorial or guide on it. Or if you're savvy with computer networking, I mean, you're probably savvy enough if you're watching this video, you can probably figure it out yourself. But this video was essentially just a basic introduction to SteamCMD and a couple of game server setups. You could do this for any game server on Steam that has a Linux option available. You just go ahead and download it with app update, make the port available in your firewall, and then run the game server on that. It's pretty cool, it's pretty fun, and yeah, a really great way to enjoy stuff with your friends. Like I said, we host the 24/7 Palworld server for the mates and get on the custom workshop maps on CS2, because on CS2 right now, like hosting workshop maps the old way, where you just like everyone joins a lobby and you load into a workshop map, that's been broken for a while. So a custom community server is the only way to actually do that. And then again, in my videos where I do Counter-Strike Source commentary on like software engineering theory and things like that, I can now do that on my own custom Counter-Strike Source surf server. And I might actually do a follow-up video to this where I set up a surf server in particular, because that's a kind of niche topic. There's like no documentation on it, and it was a lot of fun. It took me like, you know, I spent an afternoon and a night on it. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what servers you're running and how you've enjoyed them with your friends. I'd really love to hear about it.